I was doing a play with that Stephen Frears was directing, and Stephen had to go over to New York to for a film festival thing, I don't know. And he said, he kept saying, "Who is this Derek Jarman?" And he's like, "Who is this Derek Jarman?" And then he came back and he said, "I've just met your friend Derek Jarman. The man's a saint."
The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence canonized St. Derek because of his contributions to all the arts, including gardening, for speaking out, for demonstrating, and because he had a truly sexy nose.
We organised in 1993 on Valentine's Eve the outraged Queer Valentine Carnival, which is a Brazilian-style sort of carnival parade through the streets of Soho. Amazingly, that day in February was beautiful, glorious, warm sunshine. So people were there as queer gods and goddesses of love in carnival-style semi-nakedness and very bacchanalian sort of atmosphere. We went through the streets with a big entourage of Brazilian samba bands led by St. Derek Jarman.
The title that St. Derek took was St. Derek of Dungeness of the Order of Celluloid Knights.
When he got his Super 8 camera, I'm sure he didn't think of himself as a filmmaker. He thought of himself as somebody working with a new kind of brush, the Super 8 camera, and one that could do wonderful, you could move with it, do all sorts of fun stuff, which you couldn't possibly do with a brush.
The effect of blowing up Super 8 to 35, as anybody who's seen it will know, is a very painterly one. It's somehow about colour, and to a certain extent it feels like it's about pigment too. It has a kind of thumbprint on it. And I think also the way in which he could work with time. You could slow it down, and he liked the stillness of it as well. He liked the fact that he could then make silent films. We always used to joke that film had gone downhill since people started talking in it, but, I think to a certain extent we rather believed it. I think I might still believe it.
Derek had a place in Butler's Wharf, and I had, I can't remember whether it was below or above, it must have been below, a couple of floors below. And there was this empty car park, or empty space, right next door to where we were, on the river. And it was ideal, because we could go out there and Derek could sort of make patterns, and people would sort of dress up as ghosts, well, me actually, dress up as the figure of death and come sweeping towards people wearing paper bags on their heads. And I'm not really sure there was a great deal of deep sort of philosophical thought behind them. Because they could be sort of, like a lot of interesting conceptual art, which it was. I mean, it was very much out from the 60s and 70s, this sort of conceptual, multiple, communal art idea. And then you could put a title on afterwards and sort of justify what you'd done by calling it something, but it didn't actually start out, I think, very much with a very strong idea. And it was a lot to do with experimenting with the material.
I think the films were made really for his friends. They were of his friends, for his friends. They were part of the sitting round the next day and probably editing, cutting and making them into movies. But they were his home movies.
I invited him to screen films at the London Filmmakers Co-op, where I was a cinema programmer. And he arrived on the evening of the show with a holdall containing 2 Super 8 projectors and a whole heap of films. And he put on the show himself. He had a cassette recorder with him and lots of cassettes and these Super 8 films, and he showed them, it must have been 2.5 hours, and he had like a full house of people, and it was quite incredible. Really extraordinary work. I mean, this work, this is 1979, so he'd started making films on his own in 1970. So the first films that he made were from 1970, so he had a lot of stuff. By the time he got to 1979, I think he had something like 50 films completed. And he showed a selection of these, and he sort of changed them according to the mood of the audience, and he'd give a narration as he changed them, why, where it had been made, what year it was, who was involved. And with the films, he'd play music which wasn't synchronous with the films, but because he edited in he had a quite strong sense of rhythm. He edited the films, and the music that he chose fell in generally with the same rhythms and would sync with the film fantastically.
In the period of trying to, or the period of waiting and waiting and waiting on Caravaggio, that it became not merely a way of making a film, but a kind of polemic. If I can't get the money for a 35 or a 16mm film, sort of fuck you, I'll go my own way with the Super 8 camera. And the amazing thing is he made feature film work with the Super 8, and it stood up, and it just kind of deepened the sense of what he was able to do as a filmmaker, and I think he was just so much freer.
Whatever people say about Derek, he was never seduced by commercialism. He never cut his cloth to suit financial benefactors. He made films that he believed in. He did them in his own indomitable way, and thank heavens he did so.
I think that's fighting talk, and I think fighting talk is great, because you know what? What's the alternative? You do or you don't do. And there was very little money for him to make films, and necessity is the mother of invention. He did it. I think, in my experience, there is never enough money to make a film. And, there's always going to be too little. What people who make films for many, many millions of pounds don't realise is that, they could probably do as well or better with less. But what people with very, very little money who moan about it don't realise is that they may have many millions to make their film with, and they would still have too little to do what they want. I mean, it's just... money is time, apart from anything else.
He gathered together friends, and people did it for next to nothing. And I think this is what, again, made Derek, was the fact that he never really had that much money to make the films. And I often wonder what would have happened if somebody had said, look, here are the millions, or whatever it normally takes. What will you do with it? I don't think he would have known what to do with it all. He wouldn't have wanted to spend that much money.
We could never afford to do what he wanted to do musically. So he'd have these great ideas. And I soon-ish learned that you have to pare down what he says and possibly ignore him altogether, take it on board, and then sort of try and weave around his idea to some extent. That's what you had to do. Because he thought big, so you had to think, how can we do this? Because it's like his films with no money, same with the music, not much money, so pare it down.
The first question Derek always asks once we discuss all the, what it is we're going to do, the first thing he'd ask is, how much can I spend on this? How many actors or extras can I have on this? He'd ask all sort of very simple questions, and then he'd work his plan out for that day, that weekend, or even in the case longer for the whole film, based on what was possible. He never presented you with something which was completely impossible, like some people do. And it was very easy to work with, really.
When we saw how stunning those costumes looked against a black background, Derek said, I remember him saying to me, actually, it's only one time he said that. He said, actually, it's great they give us so little money because it forces us to be more and more creative, to try and produce something with such little money, makes you think creatively. And there is a strong element of truth in that,
I always think of that Huckleberry Finn story when I think of Derek, that thing about, Huck Finn needing to get a fence painted, and he just, sits down and does one post and makes it look like such good fun. Everybody comes and joins in and does it all in 5 minutes. That's Derek. That's how he got it done.
Making The Tempest was like being in a travelling circuit. We all started off staying in one of those hotels where people in grey suits stay, business conferences. I remember one night we were at the bar, and there was Jack Burkett, Peter Bull, Ken Campbell, a striptease artist, and Jack Burkett was wearing a feather boa, and Heathcote Williams. We were all at the bar, and I looked around and thought, this is amazing. No. This is the real thing. This is why you become an actor, isn't it? And then people, one by one, left the hotel and lived on the set.
We were living in sort of outhouses which barely had bathrooms. I mean, there was running water, but it was pretty chaotic. There was a kitchen which everybody helped out in. I think there must have been a caterer, but I can't remember who it was. But everybody sort of helped in, and people could choose to either stay in a hotel nearby, which the actors tended to do, some of them, but some of the crew did. But otherwise, you could stay on location in one of these rooms. And there were, I don't know how many rooms there were, 20, 15 outhouses, and so people were in and out of each other's rooms, whatever. But it was wonderful, and you'd get up every morning, and you were there to, you had a call sheet, and every day you had to make a film. But in the evening, we'd all have a meal, and I'd go and buy cider and whatever, and we'd do little shows, and Derek would say, oh, Jack, you do something, and Jack would do a piece. Jack Burkett would do a piece. And then Heathcote would do something, and I'd help out, or whatever,
I've often thought, and I think I even said this to him, and that he agreed, that the reason that he wanted to make films was for the company. That there was something in him that was so gregarious. He loved being in a group.
He was enjoying being imaginative and sharing it. And he had a good team of people around him. He liked to have people who he worked with regularly or who he knew. It didn't take undue time. He got what he wanted.
My first impressions haven't changed, really. And then when I got the name and did those films with him, it was always a hoot, and a laugh. And I think that's what Derek, I think he said once that it was more important that everybody has a good time than what the actual end product was.